We have a great show for you today. We're going to talk a little bit about the insanity that's going on across the Atlantic. We are from New York today. Ralph Schoellhammer comes in. He's an economist, a PhD in political science. He works for think tanks and teaches, and he is there with boots on the ground. And I use that metaphor specifically because it seems like the German paranoia and hysteria, guess what? Hysteria is back, about the possibility of anything right-leaning has created a left-leaning system with NGOs that sound very familiar. It could be in 1939 all over again. Then Winston Marshall joins us again. Of course, you know him from Mumford & Sons and also from his performance at the Oxford Club where he destroyed Nancy Pelosi in a debate. He is in Great Britain, and he has got a lot. There's so much going on there with hate speech and censorship. Both of you gentlemen have a lot to say. We're going to watch you on the rants on Rumble and also on Restream. Stay with us.
Our laws, as it pertains to substances, are draconian and bizarre. The psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous.
I'm a doctor, for Christ's sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that?
I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people.
I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals.
Let's just deal with what's real.
We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time.
Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. If you have trouble you can't stop and you want to help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
I'm excited to bring you a new product, a new supplement, Fatty. I take it. I make Susan take it. My whole family takes it. This comes out of, believe it or not, dolphin research. The Navy maintains a fleet of dolphins, and a brilliant veterinarian recognized that these dolphins sometimes developed a syndrome identical to our Alzheimer's disease. Those dolphins were deficient in a particular fatty acid. She replaced the fatty acid, and they didn't get the Alzheimer's. Humans have the same issue. And we are more deficient in this particular fatty acid than ever before. And a simple replacement of this fatty acid called C15 will help us prevent these syndromes. It's published in a recent journal called Metabolites. It's a new nutritional C15, pentadecanoic acid it's called. The deficiency that we are developing for C15 creates something called the cellular fragility syndrome. This is the first nutritional deficiency syndrome to be discovered in 75 years and may be affecting us in many ways, and as many as 1 in 3 of us. This is an important breakthrough. Take advantage of it. Go to fatty15.com/Dr. Drew to receive 15% off a 90-day starter kit subscription, or use code Dr. Drew at checkout for that 15% off, or just go to our website, drdrew.com/fatty15. As I said, Ralph Schoellhammer is joining us from Austria. He spends his time between Vienna and Budapest, I think he said. He is an economist by training and a PhD in political science. And there's a lot going on. I want to pick his brain about this. Ralph, welcome to the program.
Dr. Drew, thank you so much for having me.
It's a privilege. I want to start with something clear and distinct, but probably terribly complex. Should the U.S. finally pull its troops out of Germany, or at least decrease them?
Well, it's a good question. Let me put it this way. It depends whether or not Germany will find back to sanity in the near future. I mean, overall, I think your viewers probably see it the same way. Overall, it's better for the world if Europe and the United States cooperate and have good relations. But I understand that Donald Trump is upset. I mean, he probably has not forgotten that, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer sent 100 Labour people to the US to campaign for Kamala Harris. He will not have forgotten that the German president called him a hate preacher. He will not have forgotten that basically the entire European Commission said don't vote for Trump, so that there are some hurt feelings for good reasons, I understand. But on the long run, I still hope that these are quarrels among siblings, that as a broader Western civilization, we are still on the same side.
But I don't think that is at risk, at least from this perspective, doesn't look like that. What looks like, from sitting over here on this side of the Atlantic, he's trying to, I know, we kind of can see how he thinks because he puts everything out there on tweets, is he's trying to muscle Europe to build their own armies. So we're not in there all the time. And the way he's doing it is by threatening pulling ours out. And I see, and people that know this show know I listen a lot to French radio, and the French are at once wanting to take bold action and being incredibly like they're delusional. Macron the other day, I don't know if you heard this, because they didn't translate it in any other language. He was like, he was to the barricades. We go forward. We fight now. And people went, dude, if we put all the EU's armies together with Britain, there'd be 40,000 troops, and we don't have the transport equipment to even take them towards Ukraine. What is he talking about? But at the same time, I appreciate that they're wanting to build their own defense structure.
Well, platitudes are easy. Action is actually much more difficult. And that's just a reminder for your viewers who are probably not so familiar with French politics. A couple of years ago, Emmanuel Macron tried to increase the retirement age by 2 years. I think it was from 61 to 63 or something thereabouts. And the streets were aflame. So the idea that you can then rise the French people to take cuts to the welfare state in the name of defense spending, that is simply not going to work. By the way, that's not going to work anywhere in Europe. And this is not just that the Europeans got used to their social systems. I'm always afraid to tell this to your American viewers, but just to give you a feeling of what we are talking about. I think the average American takes 14 vacation days. The average European takes 24 vacation days. That is not including public holidays, which are in Austria an additional 13. And now comes the greatest of all things. We don't get 12 yearly salaries, we get 14 yearly salaries by law. So I always make fun when, some of my European friends say, Europe is a vassal of the United States, we're a colony of the United States. I'm telling you, if that is true, it was very comfortable to be a colony of the United States because you guys did all the working and we took all the vacation days. So that was very nice. And I think that Donald Trump wants to put an end to it. But on a more serious note, what is a bigger problem, and I'm sure that we're going to talk about this also in greater detail, there is a sense in Western Europe that especially due to mass migration, and this is of course also correct, that security, a sense of safety, crime rates have gone up, a sense of safety has gone down. So the sense is, if we cannot protect our own borders, if we cannot protect life in our own cities, why are we supposed to protect the borders of Ukraine and the security of Ukrainians? Again, I'm not against it, but of course it makes complete sense that most people say, shouldn't the government primarily take care of its own people before they take care of people somewhere else? And I think that is an understandable reaction.
It sounds so matter of fact. What is the pushback on that?
Well, the pushback is something we've seen, and I'm sure that many of your viewers have followed, right? That more and more people shift their votes to, not everywhere, Denmark is a small country, is an exception, but in some of the major countries, they shift their votes to the right. We saw it in France, we saw it in Germany, we saw it particularly in Austria. The case in the United Kingdom is a little bit different. I think that Mr. Marshall, who is your next guest, can talk about this in greater detail, because I would argue that there is also a desire for more conservative politics, but people were so upset with the Conservative Party that did not govern in a conservative way, that then they gave their votes to Labour, or that many Conservatives stayed at home and the votes of Labour ultimately then caused the shift that happened. But people want change. And the big issue we see, that's the same, to make this more interesting for your American audience. What we see in Germany, in France, in the UK, in the United States is people want change, but the entrenched elites, for understandable reason, don't want change. So if they can no longer win at the voting booth, they have to find other ways. So what we see, for example, in Germany, I think we're going to talk about this, is that they weaponize NGOs. In France, they're going to use the legal system. In the UK, it's very often now the states that clamps down. In the United States, it's the media. And what we saw, I don't know how many people followed this, but we currently had a presidential election in Romania annulled, and the leading candidate, who is with 44% leading in the polls, has now been banned from running because he's supposedly too far to the right. And these are all kind of steps where an existing governing elite tries to cling to power and prevent anybody who could challenge them from actually coming to power.
Yeah, there's two things that sort of strike us over here, that as soon as somebody is right-leaning, they're far right. They're extreme right. Marine Le Pen, extreme right, and then Nazi. So that's sort of right the way the language goes, number one. And then the other thing that we're interested in, and I've started to see some people spill a little ink about or at least speak on television about in Europe, is the EU has its own NGOs. And 2 weeks ago, the Europeans were outraged at USAID and the crazy expenditures that the United States have sort of allowed. 2 days ago, I heard, oh, wait a minute, we have the same kind of thing here and there. Is that going to be impactful?
Oh, it already is. I mean, one of the things, and I full disclosure to the viewers, I'm very sympathetic to Donald Trump. And one of the reasons is because for the things that people tend to complain about, he is a bulldozer. Like, he is indeed the proverbial elephant in the china shop. And he has done one thing that nobody dared over the last couple of decades, which is, let's take a look at all these NGOs. And I give you one example. One of the major NGOs in Germany that has introduced all these observatory institutions that collect information on whether people say something anti-feminist or racist or something we also talked before the show, right? Do you have a relative that might have fallen victim to conspiracy theories? Now, if you take a closer look at the main NGO behind this, they have a yearly budget of 6 million and they get 5.9 million from the German government. So they are like 99% of their government comes from the state, but in public, they still count as an NGO. And this has been going on for decades, but nobody looked at it. And with the United States doing the whole thing with US aid, now even in Germany, in Austria, I think also in the UK, in France, everybody starts to look at these NGOs. And now it becomes clearer and clearer that these non-governmental organizations are actually nothing but governmental organizations. And what they have become, and this is upsetting many people in Europe, the more they learn about it, this has become a form of a shadow state. Because the idea is, even if the right wins elections, there is a parallel institutional structure that is always left of center. And what that potentially means is that the right might get into office, but they never get into power. And I think this is now gradually starting to change. And we see it again with Donald Trump, because what's so interesting about the new administration in Washington is they have no interest just to be in office, which some could say was the case with Donald Trump in 2016. They actually want to be in power, right? They actually want to do things differently. We'll see how it's going to work out. But I think that's a huge difference, and that is at least partially spilling over into Europe as well.
Yeah, and it's almost comical because we have, of course, the same kinds of structure in our NGO, but $6 million. I mean, we wouldn't waste our time for less than $1 billion for our NGO over here. I mean, how dare you? What are you complaining about?
Everything is larger in America.
It's insane how we have wasted money. And then, I don't want to start. I mean, as an economist, you can appreciate the massive burden that puts on our debt, our economy, on the people doing the work. It's just like a giant weight on the economy here. It's crazy. But in addition to us sort of going, I'm just going to try to I'm trying to sense what it kind of looks like for people that do pay attention to what's going on over there. Is the other thing we're very sensitive to, that you have NGOs like us. Oh goodness, this isn't that interesting. But we have the oddest thing going on here right now. We're extremely sensitive to censorship. In spite of people wanting to revamp the First Amendment here, which is our guarantee of free speech, which is, I don't know what's going on with that. I cannot follow it. It is one of the most sacred principles and founded clearly, it's the First Amendment, the clear founding principle of what we're doing here with this government. Why we would ever revamp that, it'll just never happen. Just won't. I know it won't happen. But the fact that anybody would want to, I find absolutely bizarre. But the censorship going on over there, and the fact that in Britain it looks out of control, but even in Germany, I guess now there are NGOs that will monitor your family's conspiracy theories and whatnot. Tell me about these sorts of what should we call them, excesses.
Well, I think there are two things that are, or maybe even three things that are crucial here. When we look at what you just mentioned, the conspiracy theory part, that is interesting if you look at the timing, because many of the major conspiracy theories from 5 years ago, at least in parts, have been vindicated, right? Whether it was the lab leak theory when it came to COVID, whether it was the energy transition in Germany, or whether it was the consequences of mass migration in Western Europe, right? All of these things were very often people on the right, but not exclusively, said that energy transition is not going to work, right? Mass migration will have huge social and cultural consequences, and that COVID might actually came from a lab. 5 years ago, you were a conspiracy theorist, and now all of a sudden you're actually closer to the truth than those who claimed the opposite. And that precisely at that time, you create an institution that says, if people spread or believe in conspiracy theories, report them to us, and we're going to advise you how to treat them. That is a little bit odd. And so the timing is one thing. The second part that is crucial, I'm still working on a name for it that I can then finally trademark, is if I have what I call the humorous dictator theory. And what the theory is that censorship is always the tool of governments who are insecure. If you look back again historically, in Prussia under Frederick the Great, you could say almost everything you wanted. There were some limitations, you had to be careful to insult the king, but otherwise you could speak your mind quite openly because the government felt so secure and confident in their position that they didn't really feel the need to clamp down on the population. The less safe and secure governments feel in their position, the more they try to control and clamp down on the people. And if you look at polls in Germany, if you look at polls in Austria, in France, I think it's also true in the UK, they are so much underwater with the people that they are desperately trying to limit their ability to speak freely because they know that 80, 70, 65%, whatever, 90% don't really have anything good to say about the government. And that it's not so bad, I would say, in Austria. It's a little bit worse in Germany. But, and again, your next guest will speak in great detail about this, but what's happening in the UK is truly troublesome. I mean, getting a visit by the police because of a social media post is absurd. And if you allow me to make one more point on this, because that's also something we see in Germany, there's a completely new category now being developed that is called, I think that the term in the UK is non-criminal hate incidents. And in Germany, it's called incidents below the threshold of legal viability or legal liability. Sorry, my bad. What that means is that now the police can investigate you even though you haven't committed a crime. So they're not calling it thought crimes, but that is basically what it is because the police can knock at your door. And in most countries, if the police knocks on your door, that's a form of intimidation. So they don't arrest you. They will just talk to you. But then again, if the government uses authority to give you a stern talking to, that is in a democracy, in a republic, if we actually want to use that term as it's supposed to be meant, that's a very disturbing development.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. It's first of all, I've been remiss in not giving more of your particulars. You can follow Ralph at Raphfel. Is that right?
Well, that's a horrible story. I have to tell it real quick. I have to change this. When I started Twitter, I never expected to have any follower at all. And my grandfather was born in 1913. He was not familiar with the Ralph with the PH. So he always used to write my name like this, like the PH and then the F. And I thought it was very funny. I was very fond of my late grandfather, so I used it as my Twitter handle. And now I have the problem that I have an absolutely unmemoralizable Twitter handle. So I have to change this at some point.
Congratulations.
It's a conversation. We'll remember it now.
Exactly. It's a persuasion element. Raphfel. He's the head of the Center for Applied History and IR Theory. It's Ralph Schoellhammer. He's a PhD.
I'm going to follow right now.
Political science and economist. And you mentioned, the insecure governments. In the retrospective perspective of history, it's never the good guys that have done that have limited speech and civil liberties. Never, ever, the good guys, ever. And what's odd to me is, the likes of Macron and many other in the EU are apoplectic about Russia. Why? When you're instituting government policies that seem familiar to me if you ever lived in Russia or China. In fact, I talked to a woman from Russia who said, in Russia, we're not in a Soviet system any longer. Yes, we have a dictator in there, he's in there, but we are not in a Soviet system. And we have been inoculated by the Soviet system, so we know that most of the media is bullshit. And we don't take it in, if it's a government announcement, whatever. We have been inoculated. And yet in EU, same policy, no inoculation, and serious about censoring people.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's also, when we talk about censorship, right, there's always the argument, and but people then sometimes say, well, so do you think that you should be able to show pornography to small children? And you would say, of course not. But what you see increasingly, again, that's more true in Europe than in the United States, it's the censorship of jokes. And that's what I meant also originally. That's the most dangerous thing, because a government that tries to control what people find funny is the most totalitarian thing you can think about, because laughter at a good joke is an involuntary reaction, right? Somebody tells a joke, it's really funny, you're gonna start laughing even if you don't want to. Yeah. And that is that's a very strong emotion. If governments want to control this because they're afraid that people will laugh at them if you point out their idiocies. So what are they going to do? They try to prevent jokes. And by the way, I'm not kidding. In Germany, right, the former Green Minister now of the economy, Robert Habeck, he had 700 lawsuits against people that were telling jokes about him. There was an entire division of the party dedicated just to canvass the internet if anybody said anything mildly critical or funny about him, so they could drag those people into court. Now, you might say, yeah, but had these court cases any chance? But that's not the point, because the process is the punishment. Like one of these guys who was dragged into court, that's exactly the point. Like one of these guys had a daughter with Down syndrome. He was a single parent, right? This is life-changing for them. Even if after a year, the court says, you know what, you had the permission to say that. It cost them energy, it cost them, friends, it gave them public exposure in a way they didn't like. And this is, again, you intimidate people away from speaking freely and telling jokes. And that's not the kind of society in which anybody would want to live.
We call that lawfare here. And I guess there's a warning to comedians out there: make sure you're funny. If you're not funny, then you're really in trouble. But the one thing I want to ask you, I don't know if you're going to have an opinion about this because it has kind of a psychological flavor to it. But having just gone through COVID, it was so clear to me that this was a hysteria. And I was reading a book recently about 1939 in Germany, and there were some quotes from some of the Germans working in the American ambassador's office, and they used the word hysteria a number of times, and that kind of surprised me. I never thought about that period as being another hysteria. Are you in an hysterical mode there in Europe? A Russian hysteria, a fear of losing control hysteria, an insecurity hysteria? Is something like that going on?
I think yes. I think the answer is yes. Although I would always be very careful with comparisons with Germany in the 1930s, primarily also for demographic reasons. Right, the Germany and Europeans in the 1930s were so much younger than they are today, and the let's put it this way. The movements in the 1930s, whether it was fascism or Bolshevism or National Socialism, like very often we don't distinguish between fascism and National Socialism, which I think if we are actually want to be precise, we should do that because they were different in some aspects. These were self-proclaimed revolutionary movements, right? They looked at the world and say, we have to do things entirely different. But if you look at the so-called far right in Europe today, they are basically saying, can't we go back to the 1980s? So they're not talking about some sort of hypothetical past that never existed. They say, can't we go back to the 1970s and the 1980s, where it's a little bit exaggerated, but there's where, for example, you could form a family and have a house on a single income. Where, and I say this in all carefulness, but I think it did matter, right? Where when you went out the front door, you knew your neighbors. Well, in schools, 60, 70, 80% spoke the language of the country. I mean, we have, for example, in Vienna, we have now schools where 90% of the pupils speak Arabic. So if you're an Austrian and you send your kid to school, the kid is not going to learn anything because the teachers cannot communicate with 90% of the kids in class. So these are the problems that these parties are appealing to. It's not like what the Nazis did or what the fascists did when they said, right, we have to re-establish a massive, world power, great power or something. Look at Germany right now. They are so reluctant to spend anything on the military because they are terrified that every cent should go to the welfare state because otherwise the people are going to revolt. That is not a fascist ideology. I would say in many ways that's the opposite.
Yeah, there's been a bit of a revolutionary fervor over here. I wouldn't say explicitly, but these people, it has had that flavor to it. And this notion, there's now a notion that the current administration is a dictatorship. I would just posit that dictatorships don't shrink their governments. They don't tear them down. They absolutely do not do that.
Can I play devil's advocate for a second? I mean, I said at the beginning that, and I still am, that I'm very much sympathetic to Donald Trump. But if you really kind of want to also intellectually, in an intellectually honest way, kind of make and again, I'm just steel-manning the argument. You want to make the fascist argument. You could, if you go kind of back in European intellectual history, you had people like George Sorel, right? And even a little bit further back to Friedrich Nietzsche, of course, who didn't live to see fascism and Nazism. But of course, their argument was that one of the main distinctions between, let's say, liberal democracy and the alternative, and again, in Europe, that it might have been fascism, is that it's a philosophy of action. So that fascism was characterized by the idea it's not so much negotiating, it's not so much finding compromise, it's doing things. Again, you even had parties in France, for example, that were called, Action Française. Again, I don't speak French. So this was very much at the core also of these ideologies. So if you, and I'm not making the argument, I'm just saying if the Democrats would be smart and they actually want to make that argument, you could say, okay, this Trumpian idea of it's time to get things done, or the Muskian idea, even if it means breaking things and rebuilding them, you could make, again, I'm not making it, I don't want the viewers to misunderstand me, but you could theoretically make the argument that has a little bit of a fascist quality because it's such a strong focus on action, and the other thing, and focus on willpower, right? That the only obstacle to change things is we don't want it enough. Again, I'm just saying, so you could make that argument, and that would be an interesting debate.
No, I get that. I get it. And there's sort of two sort of wrinkles. One is we have been so busy just talking and just doing things that feel good for so long. We need some action on one hand, especially in California where it's just absurd. But there's most people are not aware, and this is neither critic or support. But our friend Machiavelli needs a PR agent because he's known for the prince, but he only thought a prince was necessary to reestablish the republic. And so, in a way, I wonder if we're getting a little bit of that here.
What I find sad, I'm so glad that we're having this right now. There would be very interesting conversations to be had, because one thing is clear, that the 90s and the 80s are over, right? The world has entered a new stage due to technological progress, right? To what's happening in China. So to have a conversation whether or not the ways of governing of 20, 30, 50 years ago is still the most, let's say, appropriate way to do things. That's a conversation we should have. And problematic is we always shy away from it or immediately resort to name calling. But you say, I want to do something different. And this you just point out, then you must be a Nazi. You must be a fascist. But one of the beautiful things about democracy, and this is again, why I'm so frustrated with very often the shallow conversation, so I'm so glad that we have a non-shallow conversation here, is the beauty about democracy is not that it's a morally superior system. It might be that as well. The great thing about democracy is that you can vote new ideas into office without overthrowing the entire system. I mean, that's really the great thing about it, right? So you can do things in a certain way, and then if that no longer works, you vote in new parties that want to do things differently, but you still maintain the democratic system. The true threat to democracy, and this is true in the US and in Europe, is if people feel that no matter for whom they vote, they never get the change they desire. At some point, they will not just turn against the established party, they will turn against the established system. And then we are really looking at the potential for a new fascism to arise.
Was it not Churchill that said democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others?
Yes.
And so there you are. But we have a very, I have felt for a couple of years that we have a system here. Our state system can save us. And de Tocqueville, when he was here in the 1820s, pointed out that the local practice of democracy was the unique quality that made democracy work in America, so-called. And I just wonder if our state system saves us here from exactly what you're talking about, because we always have the local, and I'm not saying local has been great. It's been a terrible thing. Our local governments have been awful, but we can get up and move to another one. And that's what we do. We move to a different state and bring our economies and what with us. Do you agree that is at least a buffer against these sort of massive shifts you're talking about?
No, I think it's more than that. I think you're absolutely right. And let me compare it to Europe. In the United States, if you're a conservative, you can move to Florida. If you're a liberal, you can move to California, right? I mean, crazy politics and reasonable politics, but both have great weather. So, you can at least get some of the benefits in both of those places. In Europe, there is this idea from Brussels, right? They want to implement a worldview, and I can give a good example for this. Now, the Germans might be very open to the whole LGBTQ, QWERTY, divided by sign, dash, whatever it is nowadays, thing. The Hungarians are not. And the Hungarians are basically sanctioned by the authorities in Brussels. So, certain funds, student exchange programs, they cannot participate in this. So in a certain way, within the European Union, member states have less of an ideological freedom to chart their own path than they have in the United States. And I completely agree with you. I think the very fact that centralization is also, I would call it imperialization. And what saved the United States
I completely agree with you.
Is right that they had these independent states, and I think that was a wonder. It's still the United States and not the United States of America, and people should be aware of that.
Again, yeah, that's absolutely correct. And they're so paranoid about Russia and China, and yet they're creating these systems that are highly centralized and are awfully, maybe even more excessive, like I said, in some of the Russian impulses these days. Well, listen, I have to excuse you. I hope you'll come back again soon. Have I covered the territory well? Have I missed anything you wanted to bring up?
No, it was great. I mean, we would definitely need a couple of hours more, but that's the German in me. We can never answer a question in 20 minutes.
Yes, it's good. I love it. I love it. And I heard another thing from the French yesterday where they were saying, well, you know, the EU is Allemagne, it is Germany. And so the rest of Europe is looking at Germany as the the big brother sort of thing, and they're a little jealous or angry or something right now. Is that a reasonable criticism of the system presently?
Well, there's something to it, but the Germans tried it 2 times. It ended in catastrophe, so we might want to be a little bit more careful with the 3rd time, because I have a sense it's just going to be as bad as the first 2 times.
Well, that's kind of what they drift into that conversation gently every time. What the French do is they talk about how long they were occupied and who cooperated and was that a good thing? I don't think that was such a good thing. So they're so oblique. Everyone's losing their mind except you and me. And sometimes, as my psychiatric friends used to say, except sometimes I worry about you. So here we are. We appreciate you being here again. It is Ralph with an F, Ralphel, R-A-P-H-F-E-L. You'll never forget that. Head of the Center for Applied History and IR Theory. And I hope you'll come back and discuss these things with me again as more interesting stories emerge.
Anytime. Thanks so much for having me.
You got it. Appreciate it. All right. We're going to take a little break, and we get back. Our friend Winston Marshall, you know him from having been kicked out of Mumford & Sons for daring to not take a vaccine or have a different opinion or God knows what these days. And he is in the he is in the UK, and we're going to get a report of what's going on there. The stuff that gets here is crazy, and I think he's going to confirm that it's as crazy as it sounds. Stay with us. If there was ever a time to be rationally ready, it is now. I urge you to consider getting one of the emergency kits from the Wellness Company, because TWC has 7 different kits that are customized for a variety of situations. Wouldn't be a bad idea to take a look at each, considering, say, what we've just been through in California with the fires. I was happy to have the field kit on hand, and the Contagion kit in particular is suited for what is being predicted to be the next outbreak. That would be the H1N5 or avian or bird flu. Of course, the same experts from the COVID era are freaking out about this potential pandemic. But don't panic. Just arm yourself with the meds you might need if this comes to pass. Contagion Emergency Kit contains ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, Tamiflu, and budesonide, an inhaler that is good for airway reactivity and tightness, as well as reducing viral replication in the airways. Go to drdrew.com/TWC for 10% off your purchase.
I wasn't all Dr. Drew or anything.
Why would I screw myself? What am I, Dr. Drew?
So crazy seeing Ken up there. He was an excellent internist. He used to sit in for me on Loveline back in the day. And just another reminder about the TWC kits. We actually sent out kits to the farm workers to help them with the bird flu outbreak. They are the ones getting exposed, and so they should be ready at hand, as they say. Also, Paleo Valley, their venison sticks are wonderful. They say, of course, the beef and the chicken as well. Low in calories, you can have more than one, packed with nutrients, made to perfection, impeccably sourced, chemical-free, fermented, and you'll recognize every ingredient. To the gym, when I'm doing weight-bearing exercise, I bring it there in case I need a boost. Protein and weight resistance training helps and delays sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass as we age. It is one of the main factors in aging. And I'm all about longevity and prevention, and so is Paleo Valley. Stock up at drdrew.com/Paleo Valley to get 15% off your first order and 20% at drdrew.com/Paleo Valley when you subscribe. And also, I want to remind everybody about CB Distillery. You've heard me talk about them before. They've got a VIP sale on now. VIP sale for the few days only. Save up to 50% on everything with the code RUMBLE. Rumble's behind these guys. If you are struggling to sleep, dealing with daily stress, need relief after a tough workout, Susan, your hands, we got to try CB Distillery. Did it work? Yeah. Good. This is perfect for that. Check out CB Distillery. They have plant-based solutions for just about everything: sleep, stress, mood, focus, even pain after exercise soothes in their hands. All made with high-quality, clean ingredients. They even have CBD for pets. Many of you are already feeling the difference, especially with the sleep products. And now you have a chance to save big with the code RUMBLE, R-U-M-B-L-E. This deal will not last long. Visit cbdistillery.com, enter code RUMBLE to save up to 50% on everything. That is That's a good deal. It is a good deal. cbdistillery.com, code RUMBLE. There it is up on the screen. All right. I'm very excited now as well to speak to our friend Winston Marshall. He is in the UK. He has been an outspoken advocate for, I would say, sanity and careful thought. He was expelled from his band. Please welcome Winston Marshall.
Dr. Drew,
Hey,
great
friend.
to see you. You know, I'm a big fan, so I'm very happy to be back on your show.
Well, it's great to see you too, and I think fondly of the time we spent last talking. It was a romp through so many different topics, and so I thank you for that.
It was a great revision
it
of
was a great
history.
conversation.
I love that, particularly we got into Reagan, because there's this myth about Reagan being the one who upended mental health institutions across America, and that completely blew my mind, as well as all of your wonderful stories about the Kennedy family. I mean, not the stories I guess aren't so wonderful, but that was one of my absolute favorite episodes on my show I've ever done, without doubt.
Well, go look it up. Where can they find it?
You can find it on the Winston Marshall Show on YouTube, all usual podcast outlets, and even on Rumble. I'm getting good at this, huh?
Excellent. And then get it on X. Follow him on X, Mr. Win Marshall, W-I-N Marshall, M-A-R-S-H-A-L-L. And I'll give a brief, just to fill out what you said about Reagan and the mental health facilities. Really, what happened is some psychoanalytic assholes got control of the National Institute of Mental Health. They coerced President Kennedy to sign the Community Mental Health Act. Last thing he signed before his fateful trip to Dallas. That was a legislation designed to shut down all state hospitals and open community mental health centers who were designed by philosophy to prevent mental health orders, which we don't know how to do to this day. They were abject failures, spent billions of dollars. All of the chronic needs patients from the state hospitals were disgorged onto the streets, the hospitals, and the prisons, where they remain to this day. And because of the abject failure of the community mental health centers, Reagan finally shut them all down in the 1980s. So that's the thumbnail of that story. But tell me, what is going on in the, what shall we call the UK now? What remains of the United Kingdom?
Quite. Well, I think it's the censorship capital of Europe at this point. Not quite the world, but that's perhaps a longer conversation. And I don't know where to begin exactly on this. So I was thinking about how I can possibly present the dire situation in Britain to you and your listeners. It isn't new. We have for several years, and remarkably under a conservative government, had the slow increase. In fact, I could say this goes all the way back to the end of the war, where in Britain, after the war, we then increased immigration, and as immigration increased slowly, they had to deal with problems between different cultures and different groups. And one of the things that came out that was a whole new log of laws to do with censorship and against free speech. Now, you, of course, in America have the First Amendment. Here in Britain, what we had is the common law tradition of free speech. Now, since the war, we also have the European Court of Human Rights, Article 10, which also protects our speech, but also has a caveat and loads of ways in which our speech is not actually free. But let's get into the details. In 2014, the Conservative government opened a College of Police in Quango, which is a quasi-governmental organization, and they set up what is the non-crime hate incidents, which your previous guest, Ralph, mentioned they're also now doing in Germany. A non-crime hate incident can be logged against someone by anyone, not only the perceived victim, but anyone who perceives someone to say something that might be offensive to someone else, regardless of whether or not it is actually offensive to someone else, and regardless of not of the intent itself. Now, a non-crime hate incident, don't know that you've got it on your record. You don't know, you can't actually get rid of it, but potential future employers can see that it's on your record. And of course, it makes a difference then if you wanted to work in, say, a school or a hospital or in the public sector or beyond. There have been 250,000 non-crime hate incidents registered between 2014 and last year. Last year, if I can give you just a couple examples, one girl, a teenager, got booked a non-crime hate incident for calling a classmate a retard. Another girl called another classmate, or rather, said that she smelt like fish. She got a non-crime hate incident that remains on her record. Another person got a non-crime hate incident for hanging jeans on their clothesline in their back garden. Another got one for whistling the Bob the Builder theme tune at a plumber. This might sound like a joke, but this is actually happening in Britain. We don't have the same culture of free speech, but things get, well, let's say things turbocharged last summer. In July, we elected a new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, of the Labour Party. Within a month, there was a terrible killing, a terrible murder of 3 young girls in Southport outside of Liverpool. This, I'm sure the news got to America.
Yeah.
Within a couple of days, there were riots and protests up and down the country. The riots were ugly, and there were also peaceful protests alongside it. In the wake of the riots, Sir Keir Starmer came out immediately, did a press conference. He didn't do a press conference about the killing itself. He did a press conference about the riots and protests and announced that there would be a clampdown. Immediately after that, thousands were arrested. And the arrests didn't include just those who were actually committing violence. It also included a whole host of what I would say are speech crimes or so-called speech crimes. They included, for example, Cameron Bell, a 24-year-old, who was sentenced to 9 months in prison for live streaming the aftermath of one of the riots on TikTok. It included one man called Lee Dunn getting 8 weeks in prison for reposting 3 memes. Those memes, by the way, I'll describe one of them. Not pretty memes, but not crazily offensive. One of those memes was of 3 Muslim men in Westminster overlooking a young girl, and it said, "Coming to a town near you." It's along those lines. So he reposted that and got 3 weeks. There were quite literally thousands of arrests. And all of these people, or rather, I would say the vast majority, or many of them, would not have been sentenced had they pled not guilty. But they were bullied into guilty pleas. Now, the reason I know this is because there's 2 examples of people who did not plead guilty. One was a man called Mark Heath, and as he awaited sentencing, he was beaten up in prison by, well, he says, by a Muslim gang. This is a man in a wheelchair. I believe that his tweet was not pretty, but nevertheless, it was not a crime, or at least it wasn't found to be a crime by a jury when he actually went to court. Another man was cleared last month. His name was Jamie Michaels. Jamie Michaels was a former Marine, and he posted a 12-minute video urging people to peacefully protest. Sound familiar? But he was found not guilty by a trial. I think it was thrown out of court in about 12 minutes or 13 minutes, not much longer than the length of the video itself. And he was protected by the Free Speech Union. So what we have there, we still have people in prison for breaking these various speech laws. Now, I could go into the details of the mountain of speech laws that we have built up since the war. I have a new theory about why that came about. We could go into, but certainly the state of free speech in Britain is not the envy of the world.
I'm interested in the why, but it's already you've built a case that is so outrageous. It makes me I have 2 reactions. One is when I hear Starmer speak, he seems like such a reasonable fellow, and it's like, and yet all this, and then the other reaction I have is, well, what do we? He does, but he makes sense. Over here, some of our people don't make sense. A lot of them don't make sense, but what do you do? What is the solution here? I guess I maybe I'm jumping over the why, but it's already so outrageous. What can be done?
Well, there were murmurs that Sir Keir Starmer had recognized the ridiculousness of the non-crime hate incidences, the NCHIs, but there have since been more murmurs from the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, saying that they were just going to carry on. I'd say one reason why these have been so successful is it's much easier for the police to book someone with an NCHI than to actually do the difficult work of catching burglars or thieves or real criminals.
That's so dangerous.
So Keir Starmer's,
you don't let them arm themselves. So what are they supposed to do? They might as well go for the peaceful non-crime hate people.
Well, I mean, they've also been going after journalists. There's a journalist called Alison Pearson at The Telegraph who had a knock at the door from the police because of a year-old tweet she had deleted in the wake of October 7th, I believe. She would be around London and posted a picture of someone with what she believed was either a Hezbollah or a Hamas flag, and saying something like, this is not pretty, or this is no good. And then when someone corrected her and said she got the wrong flag, it was some sort of Iranian resistance flag, I forget the exact details, she immediately deleted it. Nevertheless, a year later, she gets a knock on the door. This is journalists now having the fear of God put into them. And it does have an effect on people. It does, when what was very interesting after the August riots was that everyone suddenly got like, oh, what can I say? Like, can I not say? Everyone got nervous to use social media. Mm-hmm. Everyone got nervous to speak on the television or elsewhere. I heard stories. I know a lot of people who work in media and live broadcasters was kind of scared in case they'd lost their jobs because they didn't want to say the wrong thing. It was very nebulous what exactly the rules were. It really wasn't clear. So it does have a stifling effect on speech. So Keir Starmer, interestingly this week, and this is a bit of a turn in the topic, but it's declared that he wants to clean up the bureaucracy in Britain. It is maybe a Labour version of Doge, which I am very excited by the prospect. Nice. I think you're right that he is a serious guy. I think that he's a smart guy. He's a man who came up through law. He was I've forgotten his exact, chief crown prosecutor, I believe. And so he's probably very academic, highly intelligent, bookish type, but not much personality, but sort of the sort of person in the managerial classes who gets to the top.
Managerial classes, which is a whole other topic that seems to be sort of evolving into something else these days. But are they coming after you? When the riots were happening, and when fast forward a couple of months, and it was revealed that the killer, who much about his identity had been kept secret, then they started revealing more information regarding his actual criminal convictions. So actually, I should color this in a little bit more. About 2 months after, timed exactly with the budget announced by the government, the Merseyside police announced that he was also being charged, as well as for murder, with having Al-Qaeda pamphlets at home, as well as ricin. So he was being charged on terrorist charges. So one of the reasons why the riots had happened was because there was no information about what was going on after that killing, and there was a real sense of anger. There was a sense of frustration that the police, the government, weren't doing the right thing. Now, I've got to paint the picture further. It's a complex story, and I believe one that's decades old. So, 4 decades, young British girls, most of whom were white underclass girls, not even working class girls, really forgotten, poorest working class
girls in the country, as well as other small minorities like Sikh girls and other groups, had been victim of the Pakistani rape gangs. This is a scandal
But Winston, that is what was it Tommy Robinson was complaining about, right? And he's sitting in prison for bringing that up. So how dare you?
Tommy Robinson isn't in prison exactly for that right now. Tommy Robinson is in prison because he showed a film which was in contempt of court, in a portrayal of a young Syrian immigrant who was in America, and he had been told not to show the film because it was libelous against the main this Syrian boy, there's a conversation to be had, I think, about whether or not the length of his prison sentence is fair or and been politically manipulated. But what is true is that Tommy Robinson has been one of the leading journalists when it comes to the grooming gang scandal in the country. He has done more, perhaps, than anyone until Elon Musk to bring the attention to the world. The story of Tommy Robinson is a complex one because he's also done things that have put in jeopardy the opportunity to have justice for some of those girls, that's a very complex one. But just for the sake of what time we've got, and to paint the picture of why the grooming gangs is relevant to the free speech stuff, is that the grooming gangs, these girls, their families and fathers had basically had enough because the police weren't doing anything. In fact, the police were complicit and in it, and had been found to. The councils had been complicit in it, and so a lot of English men, working class men, were very fed up. And actually, this has flared up before. It flared up in 2023 in Knowsley when a migrant from being kept in a migrant hotel made a pass at a young teenage girl. The video got circulated, and the police did nothing. And so then riots broke out because the police did nothing. So this kind of happened again with Southport. There was this brutal, horrible killing. The whole country was in mourning, and it didn't feel like anything serious was being done, and it blew over. Or even if anything serious was being done, the anger was too much to be contained. It was really like the whole country was completely on edge. It was for 3 days. I don't think anyone slept. It was unbelievable. I've never known England to be so tense as that. Okay, so
did it result in any change or anything? Did it have an impact on the government? Did they do anything?
There was then arguments about whether or not there should be a national inquiry. I'm not sure what the latest in that, but the government, Keir Starmer, really dragged his feet. One of the reasons why people think he dragged his feet is that whilst he was the chief Crown prosecutor, he was involved in not necessarily judging individual cases of the grooming gangs, but overseeing. I haven't got the details I had. I don't want to misportray it. But basically, they thought that he might have. It might look bad on him because of his previous work, and so that's one line of thought there, and there's some evidence to support that. But it doesn't seem like much has been moved. There's still people, even within the Labour Party, who want a national inquiry because it's actually a lot of Labour constituents that were the victims of this. So anyway, this is all the context for what blew over last year, and we're sort of continuing this free speech where they want to contain hate speech. They want to contain speech that might. This is the tricky bit. It's all in what incites and what technically incites. And I know that we haven't got much time, but I'll put it to the why, if I may, quickly, which is that at the end of the war, the Second War, naturally, of course, after we learned about the Holocaust, everyone rightly said, never again. This cannot happen again. But what happened was it set in motion school of thoughts. And I think Karl Popper might be the genesis of this, which is the idea of the open society and then the closed society. And what they put in the open society was all the kind of the idea of freedom, liberalism, and all of these things. And in the closed society, they put, rightly, things like fascism, but they also put in that, and this is directly in Karl Popper's work, all nationalism. And so there was a weird dichotomy that grew at this point. And then actually, and this is directly relevant to the speech laws we have in Britain, in the 50s, there was, I think he was American, Gordon, it was American psychologist called Gordon, I forget his surname, Gordon, I lose it, but he had this idea, which might sound familiar, was that he had the speech pyramid, and at the bottom of the pyramid, it was hate speech or hurty words, and at the top was genocide. So then became this new paradigm where if you didn't deal with hate speech when it got to the bottom, genocide was the consequence. And I think that philosophy or that idea has been behind a lot of all of the hate speech laws that grew over the coming 60, 70 years.
Interesting. I want to dial back to what can be done. It's interesting that, Brexit pulled you guys out of a system where, you've instituted the same kind of government that you would have been under had you been under the EU's thumb, which is kind of interesting. And there's in Britain as well as the rest of the EU, this paranoia about Russia, who is no longer under a Soviet state, and yet EU and Britain are instituting Soviet policies on their citizens. It's just the most bizarre circumstance. When the history is written on this, it's going to be bizarre. But what do we do? What can be done? Is it just vote them out? Get behind the reduction of bureaucracies? Have a Doge system? What do they do?
I think what can be done in Britain is that once a new party is brought in, I don't think it's going to happen under Labour, that you gut out all of these hate speech laws and you go back to the common law rule of free speech. That's what can be done there. What's more bizarre, I think, is that when it comes to these issues, there's almost a denial that it's even happening. If you are a progressive in Britain, you won't see that any of these, there's any injustice about any of the people who got arrested for hate speech, because for them, if it's hateful, you shouldn't defend them, and it's bad. So it's not seen as a bad thing. Now, I don't think that the Conservatives are much better on this, because whatever it is that they deem bad, they will have, many of them will have double standards. I'm even questioning myself for examining what's happening with Mahmud Khalil, whose politics are directly opposite mine, and trying to think about whether what's going on there with him being detained now in Louisiana, is that his free speech being abandoned? But I'm not entirely sure I've come to the answer. But what I do note is almost all conservatives are saying this is not a free speech issue, this is an immigration issue. And almost all progressives are saying this is absolutely fundamentally a First Amendment case. And so it seems to be that there's clearly a bias that both sides have in wanting to clamp down on speech which is not speech that they agree with.
Well, no, it's exactly correct. If whatever the other team has done to you, the opposing team will eventually do the same thing. And this is this back and forth that is so dysfunctional. But I actually am naive about this. Are non-citizens given, or I don't know this, does green card give you constitutional protection the same way that a citizen gets? I honestly don't know.
Yeah, I can tell you.
I'm imagining that's a complex. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yes, they do, but the non-citizens are also subject to U.S. Code Title 8, which is a set of rules and laws that applies to them because they are not naturalized citizens. And so the problem with Mahmoud Khalil is that on the one hand, if he was an American citizen, this wouldn't be a conversation. He's done absolutely nothing that is illegal if he was an American citizen. But because he is not, and he's originally from Gaza City, he's Palestinian. I think he also he might have Syrian nationality as well. He is subject to Title 8 of the US Code and the Immigration and Nationality Act. In it, it says, if you represent an organization that shows support for a designated terrorist organization, you are bound, you don't have any right to stay here. And what Mahmud Khalil did as the chief spokesperson, he was a spokesperson for and a lead negotiator for Columbia University Apartheid Divest, which is one of these university groups involved with Gaza Plaza or the encampment in New York City, which I think is people will know about. Because of that, he falls almost exactly in line with this code. So the debate seems to be whether, yes, he does normally have First Amendment, but does this other law supersede that? I guess there's the question there that will play out in court.
Well, I guess the way it would be looked at here is he can say whatever he wants, but that other law will kick in if his speech treads into that territory. I mean, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if one of the things I think they could go after is our naturalization process is so bizarre. They could sort of call that unfair, and he could have been a citizen maybe, or who knows? I mean, the lawyers have clever ways of getting at this stuff, and I am, beneath a dilettante on this topic. But I've only got a couple of minutes left.
I think it might end up being
go ahead, finish, please.
The Mahmud Khalil story, I mean, he seems to be the new George Floyd. And by that, I mean, he is the new progressive martyr, the new progressive poster boy, although he's now garbed in a keffiyeh. And this is a story that's not going away. I think that it's really riled the progressives. And I note now that progressives suddenly care about cancel culture and progressives suddenly care about free speech again. So I suspect that this is a real turning point in America.
So interesting. Good. Everyone should care about free speech because it is the founding principle of so much. And as Ralph was saying, my last guess was that it's only the bad guys, in retrospect, the people that were behaving as the bad guys that suppress speech in the name of their own insecurities, typically, is what he was pointing out. So before I let you go, what is on your radar these days? What are you doing? Where are you? What are you thinking about? When are you coming back?
I am in London at the moment building the show. I'm about to move into a new studio, but I'll be back in America, and I'll be in the East Coast and maybe even the West Coast. I'll give you a ding, Dr. Drew, if I make it over there.
I'm in the East all the time. Give me a ding when you go to the East Coast. We're in New York right now, so we're here all the time. And so,
great.
A lot. We're here quite a bit. Yeah, we're more on the West Coast, but we're here a lot. But have you disgorged your political concerns today? Is there other stuff on your radar that I have missed?
We could talk endlessly. Why don't we do it in New York when I come over?
All right. Done and done. What he's telling me is it's midnight there. It's time for me to let him go, which is in fact
I know, we can do it now. Do you want to do it now?
No. We are running out of time, but I fear that we would get into a whole other range of topics. But I would love to do it with you. But let me just ask the simplest of question, which is Are people coming around to support you more these days, given how the COVID story and the alleged conspiracy theories of COVID turned out to be true? Are people admiring your stand more, and you're getting more people on your team, so to speak?
Well, actually, just to be more specific, I got in trouble because I retweeted a book by Andy Ngo, who is an American Asian conservative journalist who wrote a book about Antifa and the BLM riots in 2020. Yes. He documented everything from the 25 people killed between George Floyd and the end of October. He documented the whole month of July, where the insurrection at the Hatfield courthouse in Portland, Oregon, all of that damage, the $2 billion worth of damage done by the BLM riots. He documented all of that. And that book, the BLM is, you just can't, in the creative industries, you can't criticize it. You couldn't at that time. What I found very interesting doing my show is that privately at least, some people who I thought were part of the British and even the American sort of liberal establishment will privately DM me or speak to me and want to talk about things because they can't talk about it in their workplaces or wherever they are, and they listen to the show. They listen to you. They might not be able to say it, and actually that gives me great courage when they do, and it reminds me that we have a duty to speak because there are taboo topics that people can't talk about, and if we don't talk about it, then no one can.
That's absolutely true. And the last 3 years have required courage, which has been sort of an extraordinary thing to me, that those are the words we have to speak now, to speak publicly and to defend your freedom to speak somehow takes courage in the modern age. And that is a bizarre thing, in my opinion. Never imagined I'd live to see that, but here we are. All right, my friend, it's Miss M.R. Win Marshall on X, Winston Marshall Show on everything, including Rumble. And we will see you next time stateside.
Thank you, Dr. Drew.
All right, my friend. That is Winston Marshall. Coming up, we've got a lot of great guests coming. And it's a moving target a bit. Our schedule's been a little bit weird, and we appreciate you guys rolling with it. Simone Gold and Representative Morgan Griffith and Kelly Victory coming in on a Thursday for an early show, I believe, that day. Tom Wren's coming back around. Ramyo Gendra. So that's going to be an interesting show. He is doing all kinds of research on long COVID and long vaccine. Finally, people are able to say out loud there is such a thing as long vaccine. Sabine Hazan is an expert in the gut flora. I've got a million questions for her. She's the bifidobacteria doctor, and she's got some interesting data. On the 27th, Dana Lesh and Stephanie Van Watson comes back to give us an update on some of her fatty research and her book. And there'll be more added along the way. We have all kinds of great guests planned. Susan, anything on your frontier? Anything? Can you hear me? Sitting right next to me?
No, I'm just, I'm on my phone looking at a spider bite. And I got to see Greg Gutfeld's baby. And I'm so excited. You could see it too.
Oh, how fun.
I know. I can't show you, though.
Kayla,
I'll have to kill you.
Anything on, I'm going to look at the rants and the...
just want to let people know that coming up, starting on the 25th of this month, we're going to be moving the show down by an hour to 2 o'clock Pacific time. So it's going to be 1 hour earlier than usual. And hopefully everybody can move their schedules around. 2 hours later
than you're doing it right now.
Yeah.
2 hours later than now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, gut microflora, Dexter's Lure Lab.
We're going to try to do something that isn't in direct competition with our guests who have shows at those other times.
Yeah, exactly. We want everyone to listen to their stuff as well. Okay, so our next show is I believe it is Tuesday.
Casey Gates is telling me that I have great production skills. Yeah, I can dual task during a show.
There it is. That's on the 18th. We have to travel on the 19th, and we're back with Kelly on the 20th. And I think we're going to do a show on the 21st. No, we're not going to do a show on the 21st. That's something different. All right, everybody. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining us today. Really interesting guests and
so much going on.
Good conversation again. We'll see you soon. Oh, wait, a couple other things. Wait, before I go. I have three things I need to promote. I'm the world's worst promotion person. I have a new show coming out on Discovery ID called Hollywood Demons. It's a very well done show. Can we play the promo for that, Caleb, at some point? Is that
you didn't tell him?
I had it prepared. Yeah, I had it prepared. I'd have to find it though.
All right, let's do that. Next show.
See if we can
it's
find
coming
it.
up next week. I think it is the 20th.
20th.
I think it's March 20th. It's on Discovery ID. Really, really, really good documentary.
So Discovery ID is a channel.
Yes.
Okay. So it's an actual cable channel.
And you could set your Hulu or set your
YouTube television.
Device.
Can you get on YouTube?
Oh, for sure. Hulu, you can probably get it. Or Discovery
Just
app.
Google, go to Discovery ID and see what channel it's on. Okay. Everybody's got different channels.
Yeah,
Hulu,
I know.
Fubo.
It's interesting.
Oh, I have it right here. You want to play it, Drew?
Okay, just a second. Let me do
Casey said, "Yeah, you do suck at promotion."
I do, Casey. I suck completely. Another show called Health Uncensored on Lifetime in the mornings. Check that one out. It's a really interesting show. I interview some very, very interesting people, breakthroughs in medical sciences. That show is going to enlarge, hopefully be an hour, have an audience, and be a real talk show.
I have links to the internet for that one somewhere.
Okay. And then the third thing was we have our store up. All the things I've been talking about on Loveline over the years, we are now providing the products to do the things for yourself and your partners that you should have had access to all those years ago. I used to complain that it was behind the pharmacy counter and you'd have to have a pharmacist bring it forward. Now I would argue that you have to go see a doctor. No, we have telehealth. You can get these things at the store. Check out doctor.com/ is it store, Caleb? Yes, okay.
Yes.
Store. All right, no. So let's play the trailer.
And if you go to drdrew.com/sponsors, I'm going to plug this. You can find all the links with the discounts and the coupon codes to everything we have, like Fatty 15, which you get 15% off, which is a lot cheaper than doing it on Amazon. I just want to let everybody know. Also, the Wellness Company, you get a percentage off. I can't remember what it is, but all the links are there, drdrew.com/sponsors.
See, we need to have Susan just do the
I
promos,
really need you
not
guys to go out and buy some shit, okay? Because I'm not making you pay for this show.
So, all right. So let's come back after the trailer. Let's watch it.
So growing up, you were my favorite preacher dad.
So do you love me or hate me?
No, I love it.
Okay.
Am I arrested?
Yeah. He's not a Power Ranger. He's evil.
Power Rangers has a dark history.
He ran him through with the sword.
You realize how many fans are hurt because that actor killed himself?
Can I just have a moment?
My brother believed Taylor Swift was his soulmate. He wrote 70 letters. I'll have one goal in mind, to push Taylor to kill herself.
911 emergency.
Someone has broken into my house.
What's your name, ma'am?
Sandra Bullock.
The movie says it's inspired by a true story, but it is not the full story.
Sheriff's deputies found Carrie.
This is one family, a single generation of 6 brothers.
And I'm the only one left now.
These guys were kids, just kids, man.
And if there were ever a circumstance that looked like a curse, it's this one.
You always hear about the child actor that comes out all wild.
I don't know why you guys did this to me.
Seventh Heaven's been the top-rated show on the WB.
Are you a pedophile?
My friend just hanged himself.
About to be sued. I'm innocent.
The majority of people don't know the true story.
Why did you decide that you wanted to speak now?
I've never told this story.
Are you okay telling it?
I'm sorry.
Such a good show. Taylor Armstrong does a wonderful interview. It got me thinking about a lot of stuff, and that's my dear friend Jeremy London, once my patient, doing great now, great work actually, but he came forward and did a very moving interview, as you see. It's really interesting stuff. Iron Claw, 5 out of 6 brothers dead. All the Power Rangers dead.
Drew,
who do this stuff?
You're starting to get into the conspiracy world and the dark side of Hollywood.
Well,
I love
it. It's you can be conspiratorial if you wish.
How'd you get that job, by the way?
How did I get it?
I don't know. It's pretty funny though. They picked you.
But I break it all down so you can see what actually was happening. There's, of course, drugs and alcohol, mental illness, all in there with all this stuff. So it's remarkably common stuff that people just don't talk about, and they should in the context of these things. So here we are. Watch that show. It's great. And do what Susan says. Go to sponsors, go to store, and we will see you on Tuesday at 3.
Everything's at drdrew.com.
Ask Dr. Drew is produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. As a reminder, the discussions here are not a substitute for medical care, diagnosis, or treatment. This show is intended for educational and informational purposes only. I am a licensed physician, but I am not a replacement for your personal doctor, and I am not practicing medicine here. Always remember that our understanding of medicine and science is constantly evolving. Though my opinion is based on the information that is available to me today, some of the contents of this show could be outdated in the future. Be sure to check with trusted resources in case any of the information has been updated since this was published. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, don't call me, call 911. If you're feeling hopeless or suicidal, call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 800-273-8255. You can find more of my recommended organizations and helpful resources at drdrew.com/help.